The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of my mother's Victorian dining room, casting golden light across the elaborate Easter spread she'd spent days preparing. Crystal glasses sparkled next to bone china plates, while fresh lilies from her garden created the perfect centerpiece. Everything was immaculate as always. Everything except me. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table in my simple cardigan and jeans, watching my family gather for our traditional Easter brunch. At 31, I was the odd one out, the daughter who'd chosen words over wealth, stories over status. The family disappointment who spent her days playing with imaginary characters, instead of building a real career. My brother Marcus arrived first, as always making an entrance in his perfectly tailored suit. At 35, he was the golden child, the successful investment banker who'd followed in our father's footsteps. His wife Jennifer clung to his arm like a designer accessory, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she air-kissed our mother. "Sorry we're late," Marcus said, not sounding sorry at all. "Had to take a call from Tokyo. The markets never sleep, you know." My sister Veronica arrived moments later with her husband David, both looking like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine. She managed 3 high-end boutiques and never let anyone forget it. "Traffic was terrible," she announced. "Everyone's going somewhere for Easter. Though I suppose some people don't have anywhere important to be." The comment was directed at me, of course. I'd driven exactly 4 blocks from my modest apartment above the used bookstore where I worked part-time. In their minds, this proved my lack of ambition, my acceptance of mediocrity. "Where's Dad?" I asked, noting the empty chair at the head of the table. "Golf," Mom replied, her tone suggesting this was somehow my fault. "He'll be along shortly. Though he's not thrilled about having to cut his game short for." She gestured vaguely in my direction. Aunt Helen bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of mimosas. At 68, she was Mom's older sister and the family's unofficial keeper of social standards. "Oh good, everyone's here," she said, then paused when she saw me. "Well, almost everyone who matters." I helped myself to scrambled eggs, ignoring the familiar sting of being treated like an afterthought. 5 years of this. 5 years since I'd left my corporate marketing job to pursue writing full-time. 5 years of family gatherings where I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who'd thrown away her potential for pipe dreams. "So Lily," Jennifer said, settling into her chair with practiced grace. "Still working at that little bookstore?" "Among other things," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Other things like what?" "Your little writing hobby." I thought about the email I'd received yesterday from my editor at Penguin Random House. The one confirming that my latest novel had just hit #1 on every major bestseller list simultaneously, a feat achieved by only a handful of authors in publishing history. But I said nothing. "It's not a hobby if you're trying to make money at it," Veronica chimed in. "Though I suppose when you're not actually making money, that's exactly what it is." Dad arrived as the main course was being served, still wearing his golf shoes and looking irritated about his interrupted game. Robert Sinclair commanded attention wherever he went. 6 feet tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from 30 years of closing million-dollar deals in commercial real estate. Sorry, he said, kissing Mom's cheek and taking his seat. "Had to finish the back 9. Thompson was about to sign the Harbor District contract." "Business on Easter, darling?" Mom asked, though she clearly approved. "Success doesn't take holidays, Margaret." He glanced around the table, his eyes settling on me with familiar disappointment. "Speaking of which, Lily, your mother tells me you're still playing writer." The word playing hit like a slap. I'd been writing seriously for 8 years, publishing for 5, but to him it would always be playing. "I'm still writing, yes." "Any actual sales this quarter?" Marcus asked, cutting into his ham with surgical precision. "Or are we still talking about artistic fulfillment and exposure?" I thought about my royalty statement from last month. 7 figures for the quarter alone. But they'd never believe it, and I wasn't ready to share that information yet. "Some sales," I said simply. Veronica snorted. "Come on, Lily. Real numbers. How much did you actually make last year? And I mean profit, not just gross sales from those tiny independent bookstores." The irony was almost painful. Last year I'd earned more than all of them combined, but I lived simply, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and worked part-time at Mrs. Chen's bookstore because I loved the community of readers who gathered there. Writing is such an uncertain field, Aunt Helen said, spreading jam on her croissant. No stability, no benefits, no real future. It's fine as a hobby, dear, but you really should consider a backup plan. Or a main plan, Dad added pointedly. Thompson's company is expanding their marketing department. I could put in a good word. Get you back into the real world. The real world. As if the world I'd built, the readers who wrote to tell me my books had changed their lives, the letters from teachers using my novels in classrooms, the young writers who called me their inspiration, wasn't real. I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I'm happy where I am. Happy. Marcus nearly choked on his mimosa. Lily, you live in a studio apartment above a bookstore. You drive a car older than some of my interns. You shop at thrift stores. That's not happiness, that's denial. At least she's not dependent on family money, Jennifer added with false sweetness. Though I suppose that means she's actually making some income from her writing. Before I could respond, Aunt Helen's phone chimed. She glanced at it, then frowned. Oh, how interesting. The New York Times just sent their weekly bestseller alert. She scrolled through the notification, her frown deepening. They're featuring some romance author who's apparently broken all kinds of records. My heart started beating faster. Today was the day my publisher had said the news would break about my unprecedented bestseller achievement. Romance novels, Veronica scoffed. The literary equivalent of junk food. Though I suppose if you can't write real literature, at least there's money in trash. 50 million copies, Aunt Helen read from her phone. It says this author has sold 50 million copies across 17 novels. Goodness, that's quite a lot, isn't it? Dad perked up. Numbers always got his attention. 50 million? What kind of money are we talking about? Aunt Helen scrolled further. The article estimates her net worth at, oh my, $120 million. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, the distant sound of lawn mowers from the neighborhood. 120 million, Marcus repeated slowly. From romance novels? Apparently she started with small publishers and built her reputation over time, Aunt Helen continued reading. She writes under a pen name and is notoriously private about her personal life. Very mysterious. Jennifer leaned over to look at the phone. What's her name? Maybe I've heard of her. Elle Hartwell, Aunt Helen replied. Though the article says that's not her real name. Apparently nobody knows who she actually is. The room went completely silent. I could feel my face growing warm as 6 pairs of eyes slowly turned toward me. Lily, Mom said slowly, your middle name is Anne. And our maiden name was Hartwell. I took a sip of orange juice, buying time. Lots of people have those names, Mom. But Aunt Helen was staring at me now, her phone forgotten in her hand. Lily and Hartwell Sinclair, she whispered. A.L. Hartwell. Marcus leaned forward, his banker instincts kicking in. That's impossible. Lily works at a bookstore for minimum wage. Actually, I said quietly, I work at the bookstore because I enjoy it. And it's not minimum wage, I own 40% of it. The silence stretched longer this time. Dad's fork had stopped halfway to his mouth. Veronica was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You're A.L. Hartwell? Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out my phone and opened my author website, turning the screen toward them. There it was. My photo, my bio, my 17 published novels lined up like soldiers. The New York Times bestseller badges adorning every single cover. I'm A.L. Hartwell. Aunt Helen's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate. But you live above a bookstore. Because I like it there. It's quiet, I can walk to work, and Mrs. Chin makes excellent tea. I scrolled through my phone, pulling up more evidence. I also own a cabin in Vermont where I do most of my writing, and a small house in Provence that I use for research trips. Research trips, Dad repeated faintly. For the historical romance series. I like to visit the actual locations I'm writing about. I showed them photos from my phone. This is from last month in Scotland, researching the Highland series. Marcus was pulling out his own phone now, fingers flying as he searched for information. Holy shit, he breathed, then caught himself. Sorry, Mom. But Lily, the Blackthorn Chronicles series? You wrote that? All 7 books, yes. Jennifer's been obsessed with those books for 2 years, he said, staring at his wife. She's read them like 6 times each. Jennifer's face had gone from pale to bright red. You're kidding. Marcus, your sister wrote the Blackthorn series? I have signed copies in our bedroom. Wait, Veronica said, her voice sharp with disbelief. If you're really this famous author, why are you living like this? He gestured at my simple outfit. Living like what? Comfortably. Simply. I took another bite of eggs. Veronica, what exactly do you think success looks like? Success looks like showing it, she snapped. Success looks like designer clothes and luxury cars and not working retail. I don't work retail. I'm a best-selling author who happens to enjoy helping Mrs. Chen run her bookstore 3 days a week. I pulled up another screen on my phone. Would you like to see last month's royalty statement? I turned the phone toward them. The number at the bottom made Aunt Helen actually gasp. That's just 1 month? Dad asked, his voice hoarse. That's 1 month. Though it was a particularly good month. 3 of my backlist titles got picked up for Netflix adaptations. Netflix adaptations? Mom spoke for the first time in several minutes. The Midnight Garden trilogy. They're starting production this fall. I swiped to my email app, showing them the correspondence with the streaming platform. I'm executive producing, which means I have creative control over the adaptations. Marcus was still scrolling through search results on his phone. The articles. They're calling you one of the most successful indie to traditional crossover authors in publishing history. Indie to traditional. Dad looked confused. I started by self-publishing on Amazon, I explained. Built a readership, proved the market existed, then major publishers started bidding for my backlist and future books. It's actually a fairly common path now, though I was one of the early success stories. But why didn't you tell us? Mom's voice was small, almost wounded. I set down my fork and looked around the table at their faces. When would I have told you? During which conversation about my failure to launch? Which lecture about needing to get serious about my life? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Memories of countless family gatherings flickered between us. All the times they'd dismissed my writing. All the suggestions that I needed to find a real job. All the comparisons to Marcus and Veronica's more traditional success. Last Christmas, I continued, you told me I was embarrassing the family by not having a proper career. At Thanksgiving, Dad suggested I was too old to still be chasing childhood dreams. And just 20 minutes ago, Marcus called my writing a hobby. We didn't know, Jennifer said weakly. You didn't ask. I pulled up my Amazon author page, showing them the wall of 5-star reviews, the millions of ratings, the fan comments from around the world. You assumed. You saw where I lived and how I dressed and decided you knew everything about my life. Dad cleared his throat. Lily, we thought we were being supportive. Encouraging you to pursue stability. Stability. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, I own my apartment building. The entire building. I bought it 2 years ago because I liked living there and wanted to ensure my neighbors wouldn't be displaced by gentrification. More stunned silence. Veronica was frantically Googling something on her phone. The bookstore, she said suddenly. You said you own 40% of it. Mrs. Chen's son wanted to sell when she got sick last year. I bought his share to keep it in the family, then bought another 10% from an investor who was pressuring her to change the store's character. How much? Marcus started, then stopped. How much what? How much are you actually worth? I considered the question. Financial privacy had always been important to me, but they'd pushed the conversation here. Forbes estimated $120 million last year, but that was before the Netflix deal and the new publishing contract. I showed them the article Aunt Helen had been reading. This year it'll probably be closer to $150 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Dad's golf achievement from the morning suddenly seemed very small. Marcus's Tokyo call felt insignificant. Veronica's boutiques looked like toy stores in comparison. But you drive a Honda, Jennifer whispered. It's reliable and environmentally responsible. I smiled slightly. I'm not against spending money, I just prefer to spend it on things that matter. Like preserving community bookstores, supporting literacy programs, and ensuring my neighbors aren't displaced by rising rents. Literacy programs? Mom asked. I pulled up another folder on my phone. The Hartwell Foundation. We've built 12 libraries in underserved communities and sponsor writing workshops for kids who can't afford them. The photos showed ribbon cuttings, children with new books, young writers holding their first published stories. Last year we gave out $2 million in grants. Aunt Helen was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. I told you to get a backup plan, she sobbed. I told you writing wasn't secure. You were trying to protect me, I said gently. I understand that. No, you don't understand. She fumbled for her napkin. 60 years ago I wanted to be a writer too. I had stories, characters, whole worlds in my head. But everyone said it was impractical, unrealistic. So I became a secretary instead. She looked at me with something between pride and heartbreak. You did what I was too scared to do. You followed your dreams and made them real. Dad was studying his hands, his golf triumph from the morning forgotten. When you left the marketing job, he said slowly, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. I know. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I know that too. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time that day. I was wrong. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my agent's number. Sorry, I should take this, I said, answering the call. Lily, it's Sarah, came my agent's familiar voice. I hope you're sitting down. We just got word that the International Publishers Association wants to present you with their Lifetime Achievement Award. You'd be the youngest recipient in their history. I stepped away from the table, trying to process what she was saying. The Lifetime Achievement Award? But I'm only 31. Exactly. They're recognizing the unprecedented impact you've had on global literacy. The Foundation's work, the international sales figures, the way you've bridged traditional and indie publishing. They want to honor all of it. When would this be? The ceremony is in London next month. Black tie, red carpet, the whole production. The BBC wants to do a documentary about your career journey, and there's talk of a keynote address at the London Book Fair. I glanced back at my family, who were all watching me with expressions ranging from awe to confusion. Sarah, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of a family situation. Of course. But Lily? Congratulations. You've really done something special. After hanging up, I walked back to the table where 6 pairs of eyes waited for an explanation. That was my agent, I said, sitting back down. I'm receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Publishers Association next month. Lifetime Achievement, Marcus repeated slowly. At 31. Apparently they've never had someone impact global literacy quite like this at such a young age. I pulled up the email Sarah had sent while we were talking. They're also doing a BBC documentary about my career. Mom stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked around the table and pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. And I'm so sorry we didn't see it sooner. The floodgates opened then. Veronica started crying, apologizing for every dismissive comment. Marcus kept shaking his head, muttering about how he'd completely misjudged the publishing industry. Jennifer was already ordering my entire backlist on her phone, explaining that she needed paperback copies to go with her signed editions. I have a confession, Dad said as the emotional storm settled. I've actually read one of your books. Everyone turned to stare at him. The Highland Chief, he continued, his cheeks slightly red. Your mother had it on her nightstand. I picked it up one night when I couldn't sleep, thinking I'd read a few pages and see what all the fuss was about. And? I asked. I finished it in one sitting. Then I read the whole series. He cleared his throat. They're actually quite good. Historically accurate, well-plotted, compelling characters. Not what I expected from romance novels. Romance is the best-selling fiction genre in the world, Dad. Has been for decades. I'm learning that. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked Mom's garden. Lily, I owe you an apology. Not just for today but for years of dismissing something I didn't understand. You don't need to. Yes, I do. He turned back to face me. I spent so many years worried about your financial security that I never bothered to understand what you were building. I was so focused on traditional markers of success that I missed the fact that you'd created something extraordinary. Aunt Helen had recovered enough to speak again. The foundation, she said. The literacy programs. Can you tell us more about that? For the next hour I shared stories from my real life. The libraries we'd built in rural communities where children had never owned books before. The writing workshops that had helped kids find their voices. The scholarship program that sent aspiring writers to conferences they couldn't otherwise afford. I showed them photos from my travels. Not just the research trips to castles and countryside, but visits to schools where teachers used my books to encourage reluctant readers. Letters from parents whose teenagers had rediscovered a love of reading through my stories. Messages from other authors who credited my indie to traditional success with inspiring their own careers. "You're not just a successful author," Veronica said softly. "You're changing lives. That's always been the goal. The money is wonderful. It provides security and lets me support causes I believe in. But the real success is in the connection with readers." Marcus had been quiet for a while, absorbed in his phone. Finally he looked up. "I've been reading articles about you," he said. "There's one here from Publishers Weekly calling you the author who redefined what publishing success looks like in the digital age. That's very flattering. And another from The Guardian about how your foundation's literacy work has reached over 1 million children in 12 countries. I nodded. "We're hoping to expand to 20 countries by next year." "Jesus, Lily." He set down his phone. "I've been sitting here feeling smug about my investment returns while you've been quietly building an empire and changing the world. They're not mutually exclusive, Marcus. You're good at what you do. But what I do is move money around to make more money. What you do is bigger than that." Dad returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. "The awards ceremony in London. Will you want us there?" The question surprised me. "Would you want to be there?" "Of course," Mom said immediately. "We should have been supporting you all along. I don't know if there's room for everyone. These events usually have limited seating." "Then we'll watch the BBC stream," Veronica said. "We'll throw a viewing party here. Invite the whole family, all the neighbors. Show them what real success looks like." As the afternoon wound down, the conversation shifted to logistics and future plans. Marcus wanted investment advice about entertainment industry stocks. Veronica asked about trademark protection for my pen name. Dad inquired about the tax implications of international royalties. But it was Aunt Helen who asked the most important question. "Lily, dear," she said as we were clearing the table, "are you happy?" I paused, thinking about my small apartment above the bookstore, my quiet mornings writing at Mrs. Chen's tea counter, the emails from readers that made every difficult chapter worthwhile. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm happy." "Good." He squeezed my hand. "That's the only success that really matters." As I drove home in my reliable Honda Civic, my phone buzzed with texts from family members who were already sharing news of my success with their social circles. Photos of my book covers appeared on various social media accounts, along with proud announcements that I was their daughter, sister, niece. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 5 years I'd been their embarrassment. Now in the span of one Easter brunch I'd become their crown jewel. But as I pulled into my parking spot behind the bookstore, I realized something important. Their opinion of my success had never actually mattered. What mattered was that I'd stayed true to my vision, built something meaningful and found a way to make a living doing what I loved. Mrs. Chen was watering plants on the front steps when I walked up. "How was family brunch?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Educational," I replied. "For all of us." "Ah." She nodded wisely. "Sometimes the people who know us longest understand us least." I climbed the stairs to my small apartment, thinking about the awards ceremony in London, the new publishing contract waiting for my signature, and the dozen story ideas competing for attention in my notebook. Tomorrow I'd call Sarah about the documentary. I'd review the foundation's grant applications. I'd probably spend an hour answering emails from family members who were suddenly very interested in my career. But tonight I'd do what I'd been doing for the past 8 years. I'd sit at my desk, open my laptop and write the next chapter. Because that's what writers do. We write the stories that matter to us, trust that they'll matter to others and build our own definitions of success one word at a time. 3 months later I stood on the red carpet in London, wearing a designer gown that cost more than my car but felt worth it for the occasion. The International Publishers Association had rolled out every honor they could bestow, and the BBC documentary crew followed my every move. As I accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award, I looked out at the audience of publishers, authors and literary dignitaries. In the front row sat my family, Mom and Dad, Marcus and Jennifer, Veronica and David, even Aunt Helen, all beaming with pride. When I started writing, I said during my acceptance speech, I had no idea it would lead here. I wrote because I had stories to tell, characters who demanded their voices be heard. The success that followed was built on that foundation: authentic storytelling and genuine connection with readers. Later at the after-party, Dad found me by the champagne fountain. I've been thinking, he said, about success and how we measure it. Oh. Your mother and I want to start a scholarship fund. 4 young writers who need financial support to pursue their dreams. We'd like to name it after you if that's all right. I felt tears prick my eyes. Dad, that's wonderful. But you don't need to name it after me. Yes, we do. He smiled, the first genuinely warm smile he'd given me in years. We need to make up for lost time. And we want other families to recognize what we almost missed. That success comes in many forms, and the best kind is the kind that makes the world a little bit better. As the evening wound down, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The 5 years of family disappointment, the quiet determination to prove, not to them but to myself, that my dreams had value. I'd succeeded beyond my wildest imagination, but the real victory wasn't in the awards or the money or even the family's newfound respect. It was in the knowledge that I'd stayed true to my vision when everyone else thought I was lost. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right, one story at a time.